us some stuff. Thank you all for coming this evening and braving the elements. Before I open, I'd like to say that you all have me to thank for running the meeting tonight rather than calling it, because I felt like we needed this meeting tonight to give us some time to talk about our budget. So welcome to the Monday, February 3rd, 2014 meeting of the Dennis-Yarmouth Regional School Committee. Those watching at home are reminded that they can access the packet of materials for this meeting online at the district's website. Our first item of business will be the public hearing on the Dennis-Yarmouth Regional School District's fiscal year 2015 budget. After I open the public hearing, we will have a presentation of the Dennis-Yarmouth Regional School District's fiscal year 15 budget by Director of Finance and Operations, Mr. Larry Azer. This will be followed by an opportunity for the public to comment. The purpose of a public hearing is to allow the school committee to hear from the public. We will allow up to 30 minutes for public comment on the FY15 budget. Each citizen will be allowed to speak for no more than 3 minutes. Our policy on public participation at meetings can be found on the table with the agenda. After the public comment period, I will close the public hearing and will give the school committee members an opportunity to ask questions and comment on the budget. First, would you all please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I always want to say two. We will now be opening the public hearing on the FY15 school budget. The public is reminded that the school committee meeting is a meeting of a governmental body at which members of the body deliberate over public business. We welcome your attendance and appreciate your interest in viewing your school committee as we conduct our regular business meeting. The school committee believes that the school district community should have an opportunity to comment to the committee on issues that affect the school district and are within the scope of the committee's responsibilities. Some questions you may have may not be within the scope of the committee's responsibilities. In that case, I will suggest you think it's my dentures? It's not the fillings? I'm calling Tokyo. Some questions you may have may not be within the scope of the committee's responsibilities. In that case, I will suggest that you send or give your question in writing to the appropriate person so that your concern may be given proper consideration. Again, I'll remind you, please, that we will give each person 3 minutes. Anybody from the public like to comment?
After the presentation.
After the presentation, thank you. Mr. Azer, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hello. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll have to put new microphones in the budget. So we thank everybody for coming tonight. We have a lot of information to go through, and we'll do that, and we'll take your questions and comments. So we're going to start off with our guiding principle that we have for developing this budget. We need to go through some of our demographic information to provide some context for the budget that's being presented, and that was unfortunately one of the things that was missing when we had to postpone the budget hearing from last week, was that the information didn't really get out there in a complete context. So hopefully we can provide that for you tonight. We'll go through our revenue and our expenses and then wrap it up with a summary. So our guiding principle has always been to create a budget that is both responsible and realistic, which means that we create a budget that addresses the needs of students based on data, research, and mutually agreed upon goals, but also meets those needs through the most efficient use of existing and additional resources. And I believe that we have done that, or are on our way to doing that. So we need to set the context for the budget that's created, and we need to look at the demographics of the students we serve. As a public school district, we are required by law to serve all students who choose to enroll, regardless of any type of background or so on. The first demographic group, and these are all demographic groups that are assigned or designated by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. That's where all this data comes from. And all the data you see here is for FY13 for last school year, because the data for the current year is not finalized yet. So for English language learners, you can see here that DY in the green has the second highest by far percentage of ELL students on Cape Cod at about 17%. And that trend has increased just in the last 6 years from 11.5% to 17. So obviously there's been an influx of that student population. We've seen that in obviously the enrollment and also in the staffing. I believe at that time we had 1 ELL teacher in the entire district, and now we have 9 or 10. So obviously you have to have staff that serves the needs of the students. And on that mark, when you, if you're looking at class size, not really class size, but student ratios that you see on the websites, that includes all teachers. That's not just classroom teachers. So that includes all your related arts teachers, phys ed, art, music, health, as well as your other specials such as ELL, special education. So if you have more students that have those needs, you're going to have more of those specialist teachers. It's going to affect that ratio. So always important to understand the underlying data that goes into that. On special education, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, you can see DY is towards the high end of that scale at nearly 17%, and has been in that range of 15 to 17% for the last several years. However, all students are not created equal, so there's different types of special education. As we'll, again, as you see later, some of those students have more severe needs that require different types of services and programs that can affect the budget. And the last subgroup that we look at is low-income students, which are defined as students who are eligible for free or reduced lunch based on federal guidelines. And you can see here again, DY in the green has the highest percentage by far on Cape Cod of 45%. And if we break out the trend over the last number of years, the blue line on top is students who receive a free lunch, and the red line on the bottom is those who received a reduced lunch. So you can see here that the reduced number has been relatively flat as a percentage, but the free number has gone up significantly. So that speaks to the poverty levels being even more dramatic of an increase over the last number of years, which is, again, something we need to keep in mind. A relatively new piece of data that the state has put out is called high needs enrollment, which is an unduplicated count of all students in a district belonging to at least one of those 3 subgroups that we just looked at, either special education, ELL, or low income. And the reason why they created this separate category is because you may have a student who has English as a second language and is also low income, and if you're aggregating, you don't want to count that twice. So they've created this unique category for that. So if we look at this high needs enrollment, again, DY by far at 55% of the student body falls into one or more of those categories. The only district on the Cape that's over 50%. You can see some of the other schools, a lot of the other public schools are in the 20-30% range. The 2 charter schools are at about 22%. Sturgis is about 15 and change. So you can see obviously the types of students that we're servicing here at DY are obviously different. Another piece of data that the state has started tracking, which again is tied to those demographics, it's called mobility. Used to be called transient. The new term for that is mobility. It's essentially the same thing. It's students who move in or out of a district within a particular school year. And one component of mobility is called churn. So if you think of churn like in any other type of industry, it's the amount of people who come and go. The one outlier here is Monomoy, and that data is skewed by their regionalization because the way the data records it, if you change from one school to another, it counts as churn even though they stayed within the district. If you put Monomoy aside, DY is the highest of all the Cape districts at about 13-14%. So what happens is when you have students coming and going at and especially at all different times of the years, every time those students come in, you have to register them, you have to schedule them, you might have to do intake protocols and testing and so on. That all requires resources. And as you can see, based on the demographics of students that come in, they're likely to be a high-need student, which then adds on additional resources. So again, we put this out there to make sure people know what we have in front of us. Shifting gears a little bit, want to talk about higher education. Obviously the goal here is to get kids college and career ready. We think we do a good job of that. And as you can see here, DY, the blue part, these top parts are students who go to 2-year colleges. The green, the bottom parts, are 4-year colleges. So you can see DY combined between 2 and 4-year colleges is a little over 80%. This middle bar is Cape, the other Cape districts, including the charters and the vocationals, and this is the state average. So DY is slightly above the total of the other districts on the Cape, and right in line with the state average. The one thing you do see is a higher percentage of those are going to 2-year colleges, which again I think speaks to the income factor that is there. But we do know that a lot of these kids who do go to 2-year colleges, they go to 4Cs or whatnot, they do end up transferring into 4-year colleges. So again, we think this is good data to have for you. Last couple of things. This is teacher licensure. So this is the percentage of teachers that are licensed or certified in their teaching assignment. This is what, if you remember when No Child Left Behind came out, it was highly qualified teachers. That's what this means. So essentially all your teachers have to be certified in their subject area, or they have to get a waiver or things like that. You can see DY here is at 99.3%. The Cape Cod average, these other blues, are 97%. The state average is 97.5%. I've highlighted here in orange the 2 charters on the Cape. Lighthouse is at 85%, which is close. Sturgis is less than 40%. It's a very interesting piece of information there. Less than 40% of the teachers at Sturgis are licensed in the subject area that they teach. So I just think that's something interesting to keep in mind for the students who go there and the families that decide that as an option. Last couple of slides in this section are financial that, again, come from the state. This data is from FY12 because the FY13 data hasn't been 100% certified by the state yet. So the first is per pupil expenditures. This is the amount, if you take everything that's in the budget and you divide it by the number of kids you have. So the state average is about $13,658 per pupil. The Cape Cod average is $14,401, and DY is right about that average. So you can see there are several districts that are higher. There's a couple that are a little bit lower. But if you look at our per pupil number, which normalizes your budget, it's right on average for the Cape. We'll note at the bottom there that one of the categories, this number breaks it out into different categories. If you see when I give my financial updates, breaks out instruction and student services and so on and so forth. One of the things is administration. How much are you spending on administration? The DY cost per pupil for administration is the lowest on the Cape. It's about $200 per student less than the average for Cape Cod. So obviously we're doing it with a pretty lean operation here. And lastly, the other thing is net school spending, and this is based on the net school spending formula, which dictates to districts how much they have to spend on education in their town or the municipality. The entire state, so if you're at 100%, that means you're spending what you're supposed to be spending. Now, everybody who follows education funding has known for years and years and years that the funding formula is inadequate, and that's reflected in the fact that the average district in the state spends 15% more than that requirement. On Cape Cod, the average is almost 30% higher than the requirement. DY is at about a little more than 20% above the minimum spending requirement. So again, we're over, but almost every other district is spending more relative to that number than DY is. Only Barnstable and Bourne are lower. Every other district is much higher.
just want to add something to that. One of the things that we look at with this is not so much, you know, who's spending more, who's spending less, as much as it is where are our kids going when they leave DY. If they're not here in the district being educated, which districts are they going to? We know, for example, that Monomoy has 190 of our students. Look at how much above they're spending. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, I'm just saying it's happening. Nauset has about 90 of our kids. And again, you can see what they're spending. So part of what we think about when we're building our budget is how do we stay competitive? Because rather than write the checks to another district, we'd like to keep our kids here.
Thank you. All right, so the next part we're going on to is revenue. And obviously by law, our budget has to be balanced. We can't have our expenses exceed our revenue. So the first thing we do is figure out or project out how much our revenue is going to be, and then we build our budget from there. So we start off with a number of assumptions that we use to build the different revenue categories. Our first assumption was that the town assessments would increase by at least 2.5%. The debt service costs are passed on to the respective towns. I'm going to change mics for a second. That better? Oh boy. All right. All right, so our first assumption is that the town assessments would increase by at least 2.5%, that the net debt service costs are passed on to the respective towns because the towns let's see if this one works better. All right, let's try this again. All right, our first revenue assumption is that the town assessments would increase at least 2.5% as they have the last couple of years. Secondly, that the net debt service costs are passed on to the respective towns because the towns are ultimately the owners of the buildings, and the district simply manages and maintains the buildings. State aid, we estimated to be level funded at FY14 amounts for the current year. And again, keep in mind that we start this budget process back in October, and the governor's budget was only released a week and a half ago. So we'll have to make some projections about where those are going to be. Local district revenue will remain near current levels, and grant revenues have consistently decreased over time. And when that happens, one of two things either has to happen. You have to either absorb those costs into the general fund, which is what we're talking about here tonight, or you have to reduce the programs provided by that grant. So starting off with the town assessments, if the two towns have a 2.5% increase, this is the increase here on the number. This is the FY14 number, and add 2.5% to each of those. It gives you the FY15 projection. And again, these do not include debt service costs. On the debt service side, the Dennis debt service payment for next year would go up because the bonding for the Baker Green Repair project kicks in the first principal payment next year. And on the Yarmouth side, the reimbursement from the state for the Station Ave project, FY14 was the last year of the reimbursement for that, so that is no longer deducted from the formula, and that then has to get picked up by Yarmouth. So on state aid, again, as I said, the governor's budget was released on January 22nd. These numbers are not entirely reflective of that, so the Chapter 70 aid, we have carried over a level funding number from the current year. On regional transportation, this is something that's unique to regional school districts. For regular home-to-school transportation, there is an eligible reimbursement for a portion of the expenses. We do project a increase in that for next year for two reasons. A, because the current year's reimbursement is higher than what we budgeted. It's higher than the $885,000 we budgeted. But also we have had increased our transportation expense, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and therefore the more you spend, the more you potentially get back. And lastly, on the charter reimbursement, we've talked about that at prior meetings. For any increase in students from year to year that go to the charter school, you get a percentage of that tuition back to sort of offset the initial increase in the tuition. And again, lastly, the MSBA reimbursement, that's for Station Ave. As I said, FY14 was the last year. So for next year, that is 0. On district revenue, these are various sources that the district itself generates. We have interest from our various accounts that we project to be the same at about $50,000. Medicaid reimbursement, that's through insurance for services delivered to students that the district can get reimbursed for those costs. And miscellaneous local income, you see an increase there for next year. Part of that is for the 2 solar projects that are going on. There's one that we are linked up with the town of Dennis, and there's a second one that the district has been engaged with CVEC for putting the solar arrays on our actual property. And the last one is tuition from international students. And do you want to say something?
We'll see if this works. Obviously, this is something that we've talked about at the meetings before, where since we have seats available, one of the things that we know is going on around the region is that people are taking students in on a tuition basis, international students. And so we feel that we will have the opportunity next year to enroll some international students, and that's a rough estimate of what the tuition costs might be.
All right, and the last revenue source for the budget is the excess and deficiency, or the E&D pool. So as you, if you may remember from the fall when our E&D was certified from last year, for a number of reasons, the certified balance was only $608,000 last year. And in the past years where we've applied $1 million plus, you can only apply the no more than what you have certified. And because we only have $608,000 certified, we can't exceed that, so we're recommending only $500,000 out of that. As you can see, last year that was, or for the current year, there was $1,250,000. So that right there is a revenue reduction of $750,000. So as you'll see coming up, that obviously has a big impact. So again, looking at this is the history of the certified balance. You can see several years of $1.5 million or more. Last year dropped down to just over $600,000. And the amount that we've applied has been, as I said, plus or minus $1 million for quite a while now. And we're recommending that to be only $500,000 next year. So to wrap all that up, our projected revenue for next year, $53,538,056, which is a increase of 2.26% from the current year of FY14. So that is what we're projecting for revenue, and that's obviously our target for the bottom line on the expense budget, which we'll move into now, and I'll turn over to back to the superintendent for a couple of slides here.
Thank you. One of the things that we wanted to put up here, because we think that this has an impact on whether students stay in our school district or not, is the 4-year graduation rate. Everyone knows that it's a target to have all of your students graduate in 4 years. And so this is a chart of where we all are. One of the things that I'll put this as a caveat, this includes even our out-of-district students. So it doesn't totally reflect, and I've said this before, sometimes the only thing that I have control over is what happens at Dennis-Yarmouth High School. I don't have control over students who are in out-of-district placements, especially residential placements. So if they don't graduate in 4 years, you know, we don't have a whole lot of control over their curriculum or what they do with students. So just keeping that in mind. And actually, our graduation rate for the high school is slightly higher than this. This is 88%. This is about a 4.5% increase over the previous year, and the Cape Cod average is 88.5. Now, to me, what's significant about this is, first of all, it's a trend that's going in the right direction if you saw previous years, but also some of the other districts that our students go to from our district are right in the same ballpark as we are in terms of their graduation rates. And I would venture to say that having a graduation rate of 88% with all of the demographics that you just saw compared to the Sturgis graduation rate of 92% is quite remarkable. Okay. Another piece is that we are also required by all of the state's accountability requirements to look at different subgroups of our students and how we're serving them. It's not that we think they're more important than anybody else, but as a piece of accountability, the state holds us accountable for closing achievement gaps. That means that if you have low-income students in your district, they have to do just as well as non-low-income students, and so on and so forth. So the four-year graduation rate of our low-income students, you can see, is 83.7%. It's one of the best rates on the Cape for low-income students. Only in third place with Bourne and Nauset ahead of us. So again, serving the needs of all students, getting everybody to the finish line, that's what Dennis-Yarmouth is all about. Finally, as Larry pointed out before, this is the new category of high needs students. And again, you can see the success that Dennis-Yarmouth is having with their high needs students and getting all of their high needs students to graduate. One of the things that, can you go back to the previous slide? On the low income slide, at Sturgis, they don't have many low income kids to begin with, but only 66% of them were graduated in 4 years. Okay, the next one. And again, with the overall high needs students, 81.9% graduating in 4 years, only ahead of us, again, Nauset and Bourne, and Sturgis by just a hair, 82.4. I would venture to say that there's a huge difference in the percentages. When you look at the percentage of students in some of our categories and you say there are 100 kids that we're talking about in the category, and you go to a Sturgis and there are 6. Makes a tremendous difference on your budget. So the next slide, the reason that I put this up here, you all remember this, just happened last year. The reason that we got this is about how we've been able to close achievement gaps and serve all kids. It's not just about the top performers performing even better, although that's a concern to us as well. So we think when you put all of this into context and you see the kinds of things that we're trying to achieve, you can understand why we have some of the needs that we have. Okay, next. Last year, 25 meetings around the communities trying to convince people that it was a good idea to further regionalize because we thought that together we could do more. I want to thank the boards, selectmen and finance committees for sending us the message that, look, we know you're going to save a little bit of money, put it back into your programs. Because since you did that, we were able to accomplish quite a bit this year. I think you all know that we have the one-to-one iPad initiative. We're working on it. It's not all the way there yet, but we've got our iPads out in grades 4 through 8 now. It was a concern to both communities that we have librarians and technology teachers for all of our students, and we put those back. Grades K to 3, also a full-time librarian at our middle school, and a full-time technology teacher in grades 4 and 5. We never had that before for all 4th and 5th graders. They had it at Wixon. They didn't have it at Emmy Small. Foreign language instruction for 4th and 5th grade. This is our first year to have that. We're offering French at our 4th and 5th grade school. In addition, because of the innovation grant, Baker started Spanish for its K to 3 students. We only have 2 schools in our district now that don't offer a foreign language. I recently received an incoming school choice form that we asked people to fill out. One of the things that when I asked the parent, why are you coming to our district? The comment from the parent was, it seems like this district cares about foreign language. That's only one customer, only one school choice, but people are paying attention. In addition, we offer now a 3rd language at the middle school. We're offering German, French, and Spanish. They can start it in 6th grade and take it all the way up through high school. We're offering more physical education to our K to 3 students. There's a lot of research out there now about the importance of especially young children getting exercise and being able to move. That was something that occurred during the consolidation. We were able to have in each of our, previously in each of our K to 3 schools, we had 1.5 teachers, and now we have 2. School counselors. We've talked about this quite a bit from this school committee meeting time for 6th graders, 7th graders, and 8th graders. If you wait till a child gets to high school, it's too late to start talking to them about being college and career ready. We need to do it earlier, and that was part of our push for having counselors. Having an extra social worker in the middle school. We now have 1 social worker for 6th grade and 1 for 7th. You just saw numbers that talk about the needs of our students. Unfortunately, I can't sit here and tell our students stories. But if I could, there wouldn't be anybody in this room that would disagree with the need for social workers. And in addition, we added a middle school assistant principal. And of course, because we were sending our 8th graders up to the high school, we added a high school assistant principal. Finally, a district-wide nurse leader. One of the things that we know is that our high school is large. There's between 900 and 1,000 students up there, as well as staff. For many years, the nurses had been talking to me about the fact that to be in compliance, we really needed an additional nurse. By hiring a nurse leader out of the pool of nurses that we had, basically what that meant was that we didn't lay off a nurse. We kept that person and we put her in a new position. It didn't cost us any more money. And she's been able to oversee the nursing services that we have here. We have many children with complex medical needs that are in our schools, and to focus on some of the other things like our wellness plan and those sorts of things. All of those things were gained because we had the support last year of the boards to move forward, and we got the support of the parents as well through that process of talking about the further consolidation of our district. Okay. So this is what happened. After in 2008, there were already students that had left for choice and charter. But during that year, an additional 57.3 left, and I know there are people wondering why 0.3, and that's because they don't necessarily go for a whole year. So if they leave partway through the year or they come partway through the year. In this current year, we only lost an additional 4 students, 4.2, when we got our second quarter. Again, I think that's remarkable. That's a remarkable turnaround from losing over 50 a year in some cases. And you can see we were trending down. We had a little bubble in FY11. But that's because the parents are saying we can stay at DY. It has the programs. It has the small class sizes. It's not that we want to just have small class sizes for the sake of having small class sizes, but to stay competitive If I can go down the street a little ways and my child can be in a smaller class, guess what? I'm going. So these are the things that have been on our minds as we've put this budget together. One of the things that I'm very concerned about, knowing that the budget is where it is, and I know that there are many, many people that feel it's unacceptable, is that we're very fragile. And it's only going to take one budget, we're only one budget fight away from the next 50 kids leaving. And it's a big concern. So I just want to put that out there and let Larry continue on with his portion.
Thank you, Ms. Woodbury. So as we get into the detail of the expense budget, the first thing we want to talk about is just continuing on with the enrollment trend. The enrollment testing. Hello. Okay, thank you. The enrollment trend. So when we get down to calculating the assessments, part of the formula, and again, I know there's discussions going on between the towns about that, but as of right now, we look at all of our schools and we look at the percentage of students enrolled at that school that come from one town or the other. And you can see for, obviously for Baker, Station Ave, and Emmy Small, the overwhelming majority are from one town or the other. Part of the reason why Baker has a little bit more from Yarmouth is that they've got some specialized programs that serve the district. So we have those students go over there. But you can see for Station Ave and Emmy Small, almost the entire population is from Yarmouth. We do offer intra-district choice, so that's why you see some of those other numbers crossing back and forth. The new thing for this year, obviously, is for Wixon and Mattakese are now taking students from both towns, so you can see the mix there, and the high school, that includes grades 8 through 12. You can see what that mix is. These numbers do not include school choice students from other districts, nor does it include early education students. If you add those in, it's a grand total of 3,100, which I believe is a reduction of 30 from last year. 40 students from last year. So this is the number, this is the math, that's the starting point for the assessments. We just wanted to put that out there. So now we get into the meat of the budget. So the first thing we do is we look at everything that we're doing now that we want to continue to do next year, and how much is it going to cost to do that. And that's what we call level function, level service, or something along those lines. So there are a number of items in particular this year that have experienced some large increases that are considered part of that level function increase, where in years past we would just say, okay, this is the bottom line number for everything and we'll move forward to the growth. But because they're so extraordinary this year, we need to break them out and talk about them a little bit. The first thing is we have a number of special education expenses that we've incurred this year. The first one, we've had a number of unanticipated out-of-district tuitions, which is requiring an increase of $455,000. The next two lines, we have a cohort of 4th and 5th grade students that are at Wixon that are on the autism spectrum. Is a way to diagnosis with autism. And in other circumstances, we might look to place them in an out-of-district placement. The program that would do that is about 2 hours away, which means they would have to be a residential placement. I think there's 5 kids in that. If we did that, it would be about $1 million to do that. So what we did is we partnered with, it's the New England Center for Children. I got that right? Okay. To provide some support. We hired some in-district staff to work with these students, and the second and third line right there. So for $336,000, we're servicing those students in-house rather than spending $1 million or more to send them off to a residential placement. So not only is it more cost effective, it's also more friendly to the students. They can still live here. They're with you know, they're not living, you know, and these are 8, 9, 10, 11-year-old kids. So they're not living 2 hours from home. They are in the school. And so when we talk about least restrictive environment for special education, that obviously speaks to that. So it was an increase in cost, but in the big picture, in the long term, it will be a cost savings. This next line, we have a student that is, again, an out-of-district placement in a hospital program, and as part of that agreement, we're not paying tuition for the student, but we do have to pay an employee to work with that student. So again, for $30,000, that's certainly less expensive than the tuition placement would be. So again, in the net, that works out. Again, then the last line, other special education students, these are working in our schools with different students. You remember back to the demographic slide, the students that come in, we try to keep as many in the district as we can to avoid the costly out-of-district placements, but the flip side of that is if you're going to keep the student in the district, sometimes you need that extra attention from an assistant. So we've hired a number since the current year's budget was adopted a year ago. Changes that come in since then reflected on this year, but then obviously we need to carry them over next year. So that is reflected in that number. So we've got together for the various special education costs a little over $1 million of an increase. So one question that we've been asked is, well, don't you get some money back for special education? Yes, we do. It's called the circuit breaker reimbursement. Couple of caveats on how circuit breaker works for those who aren't familiar. First of all, it's a reimbursement program. You get the reimbursement the following year. So all those expenses that I just described for increases we've had this year, we won't potentially see that till next year. Second thing is that the circuit breaker is not exactly a one-to-one reimbursement. It's supposed to be. It's written into the education law, but it's become one of those, it's not unfunded, but it's not fully funded mandate. The way it works in very quick explanation is the state takes a formula. They take the statewide per pupil expenditure, which is about $10,000. They take that number times 4, and then any expenses above and beyond that, the state is supposed to give you back 75% of that. So if you have a student that you spent $100,000 on, the first $40,000 is on the district, then you're supposed to get 75% of the $60,000. Now in past years, as you can see, these are the reimbursements we've gotten through the years. Due to the budget crunch at the state level, and you can see right around 08-09 when the last recession hit, the circuit breaker reimbursements plummeted. So even though the DY special education expenses stayed flatter and really have increased in recent years, the reimbursements have plummeted. We had 3 years here, we were plus or minus $1 million. The last couple of years, we're barely at $400,000. That is a direct hit to our revenue, and it's more cost that the district has to pick up. So that's a huge, huge impact. Now, if we look at the comparing the reimbursements versus the expenses, so the way, again, because circuit breaker is a reimbursement, you get it back the following year. We apply circuit breaker to the general budget to offset some of the expenses. And the state allows you to keep a certain amount in a reserve fund for extraordinary expenses, and you can transfer those funds when you need them. So the green line is the reimbursements. You can see they've been relatively flat. The red line are the transfers that we've taken out of this circuit breaker reserve fund. So where the green line is above the red line, that means we were able to put away a little bit in our reserve fund. As you can see this year, or for last year, we spent a lot more than we got in. So we've been depleting the reserve. And if we look at the balance, 2 years ago we had $500,000 in our special education reserve fund. Right now we have $50,000 left. We've had to deplete it by $450,000 to cover some of those extraordinary expenses because we feel we should be using district funds before we start looking for any other funds. But the combination of the state reimbursements going down and our expenses going up has had a huge impact on it. And because we're only at $50,000 now, that's even less we can use next year. So again, that exacerbates some of the issue there. So the next piece on level function costs are will be categorized as student services, which are transportation, athletics, student activities. So as the superintendent said, when we went through and we reorganized the district and we consolidated the 4 and 5 and 6 and 7, probably the biggest thing we heard from parents in those meetings was, I don't want my kid spending an hour and a half on the bus, so on and so forth. So we made a commitment to the parents that we would not do that. That we would not have, so if you've got students from Dennis going to West Yarmouth or from Yarmouth going to South Dennis, we needed to keep those bus rides to a manageable time. And in a district such as DY, which covers 45 square miles, it's a big, big area. And we knew at the time, going back almost a year, that doing the bus routes was going to be driven, no pun intended, was going to be driven more by geography than ridership, because we had to cover so many little remote areas of town to get from one middle school or the other. So in order to meet that promise, we had to put 4 more buses on the road to keep those times down. That was not determined until after the budget was passed, but we've had to incur that cost. Each bus is about $54,000 a year, so that's $206,000 of cost that we did not anticipate for the current year, but we are experiencing this year and we'll have to carry over for next year. Now we're looking at some creative ways where we can still keep that promise, but perhaps be a little more efficient on the buses, and we'll see how that goes, but as of right now, that's where we're at. The special education transportation, again, ties back to the more students that have need. This is in-district transportation. We operate our own, those are the small yellow buses that you see out there. We run those buses, we have our drivers. Most of those buses have monitors on them. So due to the number of students that need that rebusing, we had to add a special education bus route this year. We had been doing 6, this year we're doing 7. So that's the cost of an extra driver, an extra monitor, fuel, and so on and so forth. So that is that extra cost. The next one on late buses, one of the things, now the year that we're in that right now is the first year of a new bus contract. So this got a little tricky last year doing the budget, doing the reorganization, because we were also at the same time putting our bus contract out to bid. So we've had a little bit of, I guess, growing pains, and we're trying to work through those, but this is where we're at right now. Last year, when Wixon served only Dennis and Mattakey served only Yarmouth, when we ran our after-school activities, our co-curricular activities, our athletics, Mattakey said two late buses. One went to the north side of town, one went to the south side of town, and Wixon had the same thing. Now that both of those schools serve both towns, we've had to double the number of buses. So the students who are doing sports at Mattakey that live in Dennis, we've got to send late buses over to Dennis and vice versa. So that's been a little bit of an unanticipated increase, and we're working through that. Again, it's growing pains. The principals and the after-school coordinators and the athletic coordinators are working through that and trying to see where we might be able to gain some efficiency on that. But again, that's an increase that we've experienced right now. And the last one is on athletics. Now that the 8th grade is up at the high school, that's another 200 kids that are in that building that would like to participate in sports. And we always try to offer those opportunities. Same thing at the middle school at Mattakey. Now that there's 500 kids in 6th and 7th grade, when the 2 middle schools were split apart, you know, Wixon may have had one team and Mattakey may have had one team, and but the numbers weren't there. When you put them all together, you've got more numbers. So at the high school's case, we've had to add, in some, depending upon the sport, we've had to add if there hadn't been in the past, we added a freshman team. In some cases, we've added 2 freshman teams. So there's some sports that we're actually running 4 teams on. And at the Matakes, where there may have been just an A team, now there may be an A team or a B team. In some cases, there's are we calling it a C team or an intramural program? So, may not be at the same skill level, but we're trying to provide those opportunities for kids. And these are the types of things, again, talking about the demographics we have, where we want to keep these kids engaged and active. And some of the, with some of these programs, they're staying until 5 o'clock. But there's value in doing that, but again, there's a cost and the offset to do that. So, we feel it's a good investment. But again, there's a cost associated with, and the note I have on the transportation, for the regular transportation, as I mentioned during the revenue piece, as a regional district, we do get some reimbursement from the state. But again, similar to circuit breaker, the state funds just one line item of regional transportation. And it's supposed to be 100% of your eligible costs. Lately, it's only been 50 to 60%. So there's a gap there that we have had to make up as well. So even though we've had an increase in some costs, like I said, on the revenue side, we should experience some of that. But again, it's a reimbursement program, so you don't get it till the following year. So the increases we've had this year, we should see an uptick next year, and so on. The last couple of things that are level function increases, the one that is probably in everybody's budget in every town, every department, health insurance. We are members of the Cape Cod Municipal Health Group. As you know, we negotiated insurance reform, I guess, through the state laws, and we were able to achieve a savings, but you get the one-time savings, but then after that, it still goes up. There's a modest increase proposed for next year. But as well, an interesting thing is that in the last couple of years, we've had almost a 5% increase in total enrollments. Now, part of that is we have some more employees, but also you have to look at the demographics of our employees. If you have younger staff that are starting families, and so on and so forth, that's another part of that. So you have more family plans that are coming on, and that also contributes to the increase. The school choice and charter school increase. This is one of those, obviously that the state passes down to us. We don't have a say in it. These are reflective of the actual numbers that we're experiencing for 2014. So even though we only had that small increase, the net increase of 4 that the superintendent talked about, the tuitions are still up there that we have to pay.
Sorry, I'll add something to that. One of the things that we know about the choice and charter too is typically when we're doing our budget is around this time of year. We really don't know what the choice and charter numbers are for the next year. So that's always lagged behind too. It's another one of those lag behinds, but on this side of things, it's a lag behind in expense because we look at the previous years and we try to usually level fund it. We think that if we continue to not lose many students, we could actually see this either level off or decrease in the future. But as it stands right now, we need to close that gap.
Thank you. And then the last line, which you've just combined everything together, that's every other account we have. So every other thing that we're currently doing now, it'll cost another $423,000 to do. So that's just the inflationary costs of the contracts we have, of supplies, materials, utilities, all those types of things is another $423,000. So the subtotal of this page is $1.2 million. So wrapping up the last couple of slides, between special education, transportation and athletics, health insurance, choice and charter tuition, and everything else, it's a level function increase of $2.7 million. So to keep doing everything we're doing now is going to cost $2.7 million more than the current year's budget. So to summarize that, the current year's budget's $52,352,000. We add in the $2.7 million. of the level function increases, that's a subtotal of $55,069,000. And going back to the revenue, our projected revenue is $53,538,000. So that leaves a gap, a deficit right now of $1,530,000 that we have to face. We do have, now as I said, all that is just keep doing what we're doing now. As the superintendent said, we like to try to grow and offer new things and do things. Now, we took an extremely conservative approach this year, knowing the situation we're facing. There's only one salary addition that we're proposing, and it's not even adding new employees. It's just taking, at Station Avenue and Ezra Baker, we have a dean of students. We are proposing to increase those to an assistant principal, and we figure it'll be about $6,000 each, for a total of $12,000. The reason why we propose this is with the new teacher evaluation system requires a lot more time and effort on behalf of people who are the evaluators to do those things. Now, the position of dean of students does not convey with it evaluative responsibilities. It's different than an assistant principal. Assistant principals, because that's a different designation, can conduct teacher evaluations. So, for example, the assistant principals at the high school and at Matikes, they can conduct teacher evaluations, but the deans of students cannot. And because there's several dozen teachers at those Station Avenue and Baker, with only one person who can do evaluations, we think it's important to provide the support in those two schools. And I think for $12,000, it's definitely money well spent. So that is the only salary addition we are proposing. On the expense side, again, tried to keep it very, very minimal. We have increases for instructional materials and supplies, for professional development, and those are both tied to, as we continue to implement the new state's Common Core curriculum, we need to, have our materials aligned with it, so whether that's textbooks or workbooks or various other things that support that curriculum, we need to do that. And for professional development, we obviously have to train the staff on what they're supposed to be teaching and develop different things that align with the curriculum to bring it to the local level. On student activities, this is again at the Matikes and the high school. With more students consolidated into those buildings, we want to offer opportunities. And again, we only offer co-curricular activities based on demand. So if there's a club that's been offered in the past and this year nobody is interested in it, then it doesn't run. We don't run it just for the sake of running it, but there has been, and there is a lot of interest at those levels, and we want to try to support that. And again, those are things that keep kids engaged, and we want to support that. The last thing is technology maintenance. Technology's been one of those areas that has been somewhat underfunded in over the years. And with the implementation of the new PARC exams, which is the future of MCAS, that's a lot more computer-based. So we need to provide more support, both in terms of hardware, software, and so on, for our technology, so we can be ready when those exams come down. So all those things together are $190,000. As we were developing the budget, so as the superintendent said, when we consolidated and reorganized last year, nobody lost a job. We found a home for everybody. We found a position for everybody. Now that we've had a year to settle in, and we're evaluating, and where everybody is in their place, we think we can find some efficiencies, and we feel just through people who have told us they're retiring or we expect to retire, and just other types of attrition, we have removed just under $900,000 from the budget, from positions that exist now, but the people are vacating them, and we don't think we need to replace them next year. So again, those shouldn't have impacts to programs, and so we have already counted that as a savings. So to wrap all that up. So again, we looked at the revenue versus the level cost increases. It leaves us $1,530,000 short. When we add in the one salary addition and those expense additions, which is combined is $202,000, it creates a deficit at the current point of $1,733,000. So when we look at the budget over the last number of years, you can see that's an increase of 5.58%. So yes, that's larger than it has been. But if you look at the trend going back 5 or 6 years, the average increase, including the 5.58, has only been 2.24%, or projects to be only 2.24% if that number is stays where it is. So again, as you can see at the top there, where we had a 0 and then the budget actually went down, we're in some ways still trying to make up for that, because we're trying to bring back those services. And when you combine that with the types of students that have come in the last number of years, it sort of increases that a little more exponentially than you would have if, in a straight line. So that is where that comes out to be. So that is what I have for you. I appreciate everyone's attention and patience and with both my talking and the microphones. And turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
We'll see if this is working. All right, we'll now open up to the public. If anybody from the public has any comments or questions to offer, suggest. Anyone at all? Yes, sir, please.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is James Plath. I'm chairman of the Finance Committee in the town of Dennis. First, I'd like to congratulate the school committee and the superintendent and the staff for your achievements over the past several years, and particularly with the enhancements that we saw tonight. It was outlined in the FY14 budget. I hope that the support that the Dennis Finance Committee has given you at town meeting will continue, and I hope that that support has been helpful over the past years. One area that I would like to re-emphasize this evening is the funding. Back in late fall, I'm not sure if it was October or November, the Dennis Finance Committee took a position that we would continue to support the district with the Chapter 70 funding formula. Our town administrator has put aside 2.5% for growth, but we have taken the position that the 2.5 figure is one that we could live with, but we do not want to limit ourselves to that number. We just simply want to limit ourselves, our position, the Finance Committee's position, to the Chapter 70 formula. Whether that number comes out to greater than 2.5% or not will be your decision. We early, as soon as we came to this decision, advised members of our Board of Selectmen. We advised several members of the school committee, the superintendent's office, administration over at the town of Yarmouth, that we intend to support at this time the Finance Committee at town meeting a budget that is based on the Chapter 70 formula until such time as the term assessment program is agreed to by both towns. We did this last fall so there would be no surprises, so you would know what our position is going to be in this fiscal year. We hope that the budget that you present to us to bring to town meeting we can support, and we hope that it is one that is based on the Chapter 70 formula to each town. The reason we bring this up is because last year we gladly agreed to pay greater than our Chapter 70 formula. We did that last year willingly, as we had done with a different formula in the prior year. But as we continue and we look at our municipal side of the budget, the additional 2.5% growth on the additional $90-something thousand, I believe it was $92,000 that we paid last year, will not be sustained and will not be supported by the Finance Committee at the Dennis Town meeting at this time. As always, we leave room for movement, we leave room for support, but we believe that the Chapter 70 formula has been imposed, and when the funding mechanism goes to the voters at the Dennis Town meeting, we will be looking to impose the Chapter 70 formula for an equal assessment based on the formula. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Plath. Anyone else like to approach the microphone and make comment at this point? Yes, please, approach the microphone.
Good evening, Wayne Bergeron, Selectman of the Town of Dennis. I do not sit up here speaking for all selectmen, but I think I speak for the general direction we're going in. There is an opportunity that the Finance Committee in Dennis and the Board of Selectmen in Dennis may not be on the same page in terms of funding schools. That doesn't help you at all. There will be conversations between both groups, I suspect, right up to the end, and we're going to find a middle ground I hope we can live with. The shortfall of the Chapter 70 funding formula is well known to all, and in both towns, quite frankly, over a period of time. We have some budget items now that I would call the new normal for us that we have to address. Since we decided to go ahead as two communities, to have more complete regionalization, with the exception of K through 3 in both of our towns, we've picked up additional costs. We picked them up, as you pointed out, regarding busing, both after school and regular school busing. The towns need to find a way to help pay for that as part of the overall budget, in addition to some of the things that we're looking at. Chapter 70 does not look at those considerations. We just get sucked up into it. My concern, and I know it's shared by other people in the community, and it's been mentioned tonight, is that if we cut too much out of our budget and we start losing students on a wholesale basis to school choice, we haven't only degraded our education, how much money have we really saved us ourselves? Now, I'm not sure how much money for all the students now. It changes every year when they leave, but I know what the total costs have been because you put them in our budgets to look at. And neither Dennis or Yarmouth can go ahead and afford to go back to a situation where we're losing so much money because of school choice to other schools that we're not getting the education we need for our students, and we're always trying to scramble to find the proper amount of money. I have no idea where that line is in terms of where too much is too much. You know, philosophically, I think losing any students is too much. In terms of reality and where we're going to go with this, I'm not sure. You've clearly had some work ahead of you here. And I know you're looking at it with an idea that you want to save as much of this as you can. To go backwards now with all the wonderful advancements that this school system has made is just unacceptable. And to the extent that we can go ahead and not do that, it's going to benefit both communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bergeron. Thank you, Mr. Bergeron. Any other comments from the public this evening? Okay, seeing none, we'll close the public portion of our budget hearing and turn it back over to our committee for comment. Mr. Edwards, please.
Thank you, Larry and Carol, for doing that, and thank you for everyone for coming. Larry, a couple of things that I think should be clarified. The E&D for this year is $500,000, where before we had over $1 million. Don't we have $400,000 that we cannot use this year use this year, but we can only, for this coming fiscal year, but we can only use it for the following fiscal year, that if in fact we had gotten the funding for the Ezra Baker bonding, we would have gotten that, that would have come in with the $400,000, is that correct?
Yes. Yes, part of the reason why the E&D was only certified at $600,000 for the current year is because the state, when they go through and look at all your available balances, they look at any accounts that have deficits in them. And so the way that we work capital projects in the district is that the district expends the funds and then gets reimbursed by the town. Then that's just for annual projects that come up at town meeting articles through the capital plans, as well as the larger renovation project that we had at Baker. The district did short-term borrowing to pay the bills on the project, and then when the actual bond was done, that's when it gets converted over to the debt service like we talked about in the budget. Because the project didn't get wrapped up and closed up by the state until late in last summer, it missed the deadline. We couldn't bond the outstanding balance until the state closed it out and we knew how much we had to borrow for permanent borrowing. And by the time we did that in September, the state's cutoff for calculating those end-of-year balances had already passed. And that amount was about $400 and some odd thousand. Since we did the bonding, it's cut about over $300,000 out of that. There's still a balance left for the septic system, which I believe is being worked out. And we get that money in, that'll take care of that. So once we get those funds in, those won't be certified as towards E&D until this upcoming summer, really into the fall, which is after this budget closes. So it's similar to the town's free cash process. So when the town goes to town meeting in the spring, occasionally they'll be say, okay, well, we'll come back in the fall when free cash is certified and we'll balance a budget or we'll fund an article. So those funds aren't available to the district until after the budget's already set. So therefore, those funds would be available for the FY16 budget because they won't be certified until after we go through this process.
Okay. So if the E&D is $400,000 and we have to come up with almost $1 million for our special needs kids, that's $1.4 million. Am I adding correctly? $1 million for the special education kids, right? And then 400, that's 1.4 of the 1.7 extra. Is that correct?
I think
Am I doing the math right?
well, I think the better way to look at it is that the $750,000 less that we applied between this year and we're proposing for next year, it's a reduction of $750,000. I think if you take that plus the $1 million, then that gets you to the number that's short. I mean,
No, I hear what you're saying,
so-
but the point that I'm trying to make is
Yeah, I mean,
the 1.7.
the 400 is part of this 750.
Right, but what the point that I'm trying to make is we're short 1.7, okay? And we can identify specifically that, you know, the E&D was less this year, and we had children who came in the district that were required by law to fund their education for close to $1 million based upon what you did, what you said. Is that not correct?
Yes, that is mathematically correct, but
Okay. So, the other question that I think that would be nice to know is how the charter school reimbursement, not the charter reimbursement goes, because it's a whole big formula, but usually with choice, it's about $65,000 to $6,000 reimbursement, where charter, if the kids go, it includes net school spending, which is closer to $13,000 to $14,000 per student. Is that correct?
yes, the school choice tuition for a student who is out the whole year, it starts at $5,000, and if there's any special education services being provided in the other district, those get passed back to us. So when you take a weighted average of all those things, typically DY has been spending about $6,500 per student that goes out on school choice. The charter schools are based on the district's foundation budget plus how much we're spending over foundation, the theory being from the state that the resources that you would spend on that student if they stayed in your district should carry over to the charter school. So for DY, it ends up being around $13,000 per student.
Thank you.
Can I add something to that, Steve? I guess I just want to give kind of a little scenario. I think it highlights the importance of why we're doing some of the things that we're trying to do for our children with needs in the district. If I'm a parent and I'm become unhappy with how you're taking care of my child, and I decide to go to the district next door, the district next door has no skin in the game. So whatever you want, you can have. We'll just charge that district that sent us this child. So that's another reason why it's important for us to take care of business, because we can often do it in a much more cost-effective way if we take care of it up front, rather than saying, no, sorry, we can't do that, we can't do that, we can't do that. And when you see like a lot of assistants added and stuff, sometimes it's because we talked at length about this today in our administrative meeting. The way the schedule works, you know, the student to be included in the regular classroom needs somebody there to help them for some things, but not everything. But you can't say, okay, well, look at, you have it a half hour, so go home to the assistant. We try to use them in other ways to make it more cost effective, but it's not a perfect schedule. So when we look at some of these things and we try to cut them back, it's just not as clean as we would like it to be. But I think it's important for people to understand that part of the reason we're doing some of the things that we're doing, this new program that we just started this year, it's a highly specialized program, and the students are doing beautifully in that program. And that has to count for something.
See how this mic works. First of all, thanks Jim and Wayne for your public comment and making sure that we understand what's going on. And Larry and Carol, thank you. This is obviously not going to be a very easy process, but there is a process that has to take place, and this is just one part of it. 2 weeks, is it the 13th, that we have to approve our budget, our initial approval, correct? So look towards February 13th, I think it is, right? Is our certifying our budget. And then at that point, the budget can only go down, like we've learned from many years ahead previously. I have a couple comments and questions. You know, one, I think it's important that a lot of the shortfall comes from, I guess, $400,000 of what could have been E&D funds that aren't there. So, but we were told long ago that our E&D would start to deplenish, and that we should stop really focusing on that as a way of lowering the assessment continually to our towns. And whether it's natural or unnatural, because that $400,000 isn't there, we're starting to see that this year. The special education costs that this district continually has to absorb, I think nobody here is trying to blame anybody. We educate everybody and anybody that walks through our doors, plain and simple. And we educate the problems and the assets that they come with them. We have students that are super high achievers that go off and do wonderful things. And then at the other end, we have students that need a lot of special needs, special help. And that tends to cost a lot of extra money. And I think that's what we're starting to see. Over $300,000 for 5 students? Is that correct?
Yes.
$300,000 for 5 students that, if we sent them out of district, would have cost us $1 million. And that's new costs. And it's hard to, you know, I've heard it said by other people in this room, but for the grace of God go I, you know, but at the same time, we have to educate those students. Some of the things that we're gonna have to make some hard decisions, and I don't know where to start. And I don't want to be the only one. I shouldn't say I don't want to be the only one. I think we have to look at our busing also. Some of the new costs in the busing, and whether it's the towns helping us, Mr. Bergeron, in some way or shape or form, or we do a better job in some of those buses. Additional late buses are $150,000. I'd like to see a little bit of information on that. I'd like to see, you know, I hate to be this way, how many students are riding those buses, you know, for that? And I know that's a cost of some of the changes that we made, but that sticks out pretty hard to me. So we have a lot of hard work to do, and I think we have to continually look at this budget on our side of it, tweak it if we can, or at least justify it a lot more than just one night of a public hearing, and go from there. Thank you.
I actually have several questions. On the chart for per pupil expenditure and net school spending, we had Sturgis and Lighthouse on all of the other charts up until that point, and they drop off of those 2 charts. Can you tell me why?
One of the frustrating and, depending upon your perspective, interesting things about charter schools is that they have different financial reporting requirements, and amongst those is that they don't have net school spending requirements and per pupil reporting, at least not to the same degree that the traditional municipal districts do, because they get the vast majority of their funding from sending districts. So essentially, however many kids go, that's how much money they get. So there's very limited financial information on the charter schools. That's why they're not in those 2 charts, because the data just doesn't exist for them.
Would it be fair to say that they're not held to the same accountability as we are as a regional school district? Why don't they have to report it?
I'm sure that they do. They have reporting requirements. They're just different. So, for example, this chart can tell you something. If 10 students go to one of the charter schools from Nauset, you see whatever the number Nauset is, let's say it's 18,000, because that's what it kind of looks like up there. Each one of those 10 students costs Nauset $18,000. If 10 students go from DY, each one of those students costs a little over $14,000. It goes by the per pupil expenditure. They had like a couple of kids from Provincetown in previous years when Provincetown had a high school. They were in the $20,000 plus range, $25,000 a kid. Now, these, Mr. Plath can appreciate this, these are the same seats. Every student is the same. But depending on the district that they come from, they pay a different rate.
Also, the licensure for the teachers, the charter school, both charter schools, the licensure is much less than across the board, across the Cape. Why is that?
I don't know. We have been required to move toward 100% teacher certification in the areas. They have to be licensed in the areas that they're teaching. It's required. When we don't have that, for several years we had to make plans and submit them to the state about how we were going to make sure that that did improve. And so that's why I think you can see that a lot of the districts have made significant progress in that. One of the things that I think about a lot is either the whole licensure program is a farce, or the students that are at those schools and achieving so well can achieve no matter who teaches them. Those are thoughts that brings to mind for me, but I don't have the answer about why.
And the low income as well, could we go to the graduation rate for the low income students? It's 66.7% for Sturgis, and it's 83.7% for DY.
That's correct.
Doesn't the state hold us to guidelines for graduation rates too? And don't they look at isn't one of the low-income students one of the subgroups that they look at?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Recently, Sturgis asked for an increase in the number of seats at their school to go from 800 to 850. The commissioner said that they had to do a better job of mirroring the demographics of the surrounding communities before that would happen. I think this is an example as to why.
Say that again, please. That recently they asked for what?
They, in the fall, or in the end of the summer, they have to petition the state to ask for it if they want to change their configuration or have more seats available or whatever. Remember, recently they doubled in size. They asked for additional 50 seats, and were told by the commissioner that not at this time until they do a better job of mirroring the demographics of the neighboring community schools, public schools.
And that's, how many students? 6?
In our district, it was 98, I believe.
But it's 6 in Sturgis,
6.
right? So it's going to take more than 50 seats.
Well, no.
No, but I mean, I'm saying even if they filled that with 50 low-income students,
Sure.
they still wouldn't make it to mirror the demographics. We're at 45% low-income in DY, correct?
Right, and Barnstable's their other, community. They're right in Barnstable, so.
It certainly doesn't seem like a level playing field to me. That's just an observation from looking at all the slides, and I thought it was interesting that their per pupil expenditure and their net school spending just completely drops off the chart. It's because it's not available to you. Is that correct? That's correct, right?
That's correct.
All right. Then I had a couple more questions. The special education tuitions, the $455,538 are new to this district. Students that are new to this district this year. Is that correct? New placements. How many students is that? I know you can't talk about specifics, and I wouldn't want you to, but.
We have a grand total.
42.
But it's not 42 new students this year. We have a grand total of 42 students that are in out-of-district placements. But as you know, sometimes the placements range in, I have that here somewhere. The placements range from placements that we have that would be like at the collaborative, I believe they're around $38,000, all the way up to residential placements that are usually in the neighborhood of $200,000. So that's kind of the range.
These dollar amounts here are new.
Those dollar amounts are new.
This year.
That's correct.
Okay, so the $455,000, the 160 and the 176, which is combined is the autism program.
Correct.
Which leaves those children in their homes.
Absolutely.
Locally, in their community, where I feel they belong, just on a personal level. And it would cost us approximately, or could, up to $1 million to send those kids somewhere else.
The best program that we found for them was the New England Center for Children.
In Marlboro,
is
that
correct? It's close to 2 hours away.
Is it Marlboro?
Southborough.
Borough. And then I mean, these are all new costs, though. This is this year, they're all new costs. I mean, they were unanticipated. You can't tell when a special needs kid is going to move into the district and what their needs are going to be. I mean, that's like saying that we could tell how much snow we're going to get on a given winter. We don't know.
I haven't been too good at that this year
No,
either.
me either. But it, you know, I mean, we don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. So then we're talking about these new kids moving into the district, and Mr. Bergeron spoke to this point. When I started getting involved, when my kids were way younger, unfortunately I'm getting older, but, and going to school committee meetings as a member of the community, one of the biggest gripes that I heard, and at the time was having a little bit of a hard time relating to it because my oldest son had so many special needs, was the parents talking about their gifted children, their needs not being met. And again, I had a hard time relating to it, but God has a great way of teaching me lessons. So number 2 is pretty bright and does well and is involved in all kinds of different things that he loves and does, you know, really. There were so many parents getting up and talking about how upset they were that those programs are not available to their bright children, and they weren't at the time, and now we've been working toward putting those in place and making improvements in the district. And if we start talking immediately about that we need to start looking at where we're going to cut, those are the programs that are going to be cut because we can't cut these. They're mandated, right? State mandated and I suppose sometimes federally mandated, right? So they're federally mandated. I don't know, when we immediately go to that, and I'm not saying, I mean, really, honestly, I'm sitting here tonight and I'm listening, and it's a process that I think we all need to go through, the communities together with us, with the school board. But I don't think we want to go backward. I don't think we want to be cutting those things out. How much does one of these students cost when they leave the district? 13,000?
Yeah, so it's close to 14 now for charter. It's, you know, the 5,000 plus whatever else the other expenses are for choice.
Okay, so it's close to 14,000. Where's the per pupil expenditure in district? Where's that?
It's right around 14.
It's right around 14. Okay, and then what you're saying is, as far as special needs goes, if these, and this sounds terrible to me, but I want to say it out loud anyway. If they go to another district, it's not costing that district anything, so they could give them the moon if they ask for it. So Sturgis, who's trying to get up their numbers of special needs kids because the state's telling them, oh, no, could have these students come in and promise them the world, and we pay for it. And we don't have any control over how much that costs. Correct?
I want to give you an example, Mary Ellen, from another district on that. I'm not sure that those costs would end up going to Sturgis. In a neighboring district, there was a student who had never gone to any of the district schools. And I don't know if the student was in private schools or other charter schools or whatever, but the student finally went to the charter school. It was discovered that the student had some significant needs and needed a residential placement. The charter school was not responsible for paying for that placement. It was the sending district. So I don't know if that really answers your question. But
It does answer my question. I mean, it's way more complicated than even, you know, I mean, it's complicated enough, but it's even more complicated than that. And I think we have to be careful about, too, we had all of these parents come together in both towns and agree to let their children cross the river and you know, consolidate and make all these changes, and now we're going to pull the rug out from under their feet, you know what I mean? And, you know, we did have those 25 meetings. I don't know. I mean, I think that there's a lot to think about, is all that I'm saying, and I don't think it's all black and white, and we have to be careful. It's all that, you know, I'm trying to say, and I know it's not as simple as that, believe me. So, and I don't know. I just think it's very, very complicated, and we need to be careful with this. So, that's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This one seems to be working. Maybe we're isolated. Maybe that's here at the youth table. Again, thanks for the presentation, and we've had a chance to work on this material for some time, but one small observation and one larger one. The small one has to do with charter schools. When they were first established 20 years ago, it was a highlight that they did not have to hire certified teachers. They wanted to encourage innovation, and to my knowledge, those teachers, I have not heard that they have to be certified in their field at all, unlike they are public schools, but they're not traditional public schools. And by the same token, they are answerable not to the taxpayer or to the voters or to the municipal sources of interest and support, but rather they're answerable to the Department of DESE. Their board of directors are not elected and are appointed in a rather obscure way that is not obvious. So when it's hard to find the financial figures, it's also hard to find some of the decision-making process as well for those who've tried to exercise their curiosity or their rights as citizens in the open meeting law. But that leads to the idea that the one thing DY has participated in, or very much so historically, has been the discussion among towns, taxpayers, parents, about the best funding level, about the best programs. I don't have any answers myself as to what the final town meeting levels of expenses and revenues are going to look like, but I have noted this past few years that both towns have an increase in municipal planning and creative economic development. Both towns show new programs in community planning and community policing. There's been an improvement in the quality of services in towns' programs, all at the same time that DY has been working to improve its response to the student needs for the competition for the 21st century education, as well as the competition from the charter and choice schools. There has been an increase in communications within the towns and the schools and between them, and I think we have really made great strides as a community. We have a room full of municipal leaders and school supporters here present, and Mr. Plath alludes to the increased improvement in communications and support, and I certainly endorse that. I think we have reached a new level of working together. So one of the things that's different than previous years is the lack of finger pointing and hostility. I myself have certainly witnessed the pushback that comes from the budget not coming in the way we would like, or not all citizens would like, but we are still discussing it, and if we can maintain that cordial and collegial and respectful conversation, then we're not going to have parents and taxpayers and voters voicing their displeasure by voting down budgets and parents taking their kids out of DY out of fear or anxiety about what's going to happen. We've made a lot of progress. Our silver medal for DY and the communications with the two towns has never been better. So I'm hoping that we can maintain that, and even if we have to make some painful choices, it's going to be done with a sense of support and community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the things, nice segue, Phil, for this thought. Next Monday, we were scheduled to have a finance subcommittee meeting. And so what I would like to suggest is that perhaps we invite the boards to a joint meeting where maybe we can sit around a big table and talk about some possibilities and share ideas and maybe solutions or whatever. But I think it would be important now. We've had them in the past. We've had a lot of joint meetings in the past, but this seems like the right time for this. And so perhaps if the school committee would be so, if you would entertain that idea, I would get something out tomorrow to invite the boards to such a meeting on next Monday.
Mr. Edwards, please.
As chairman of that, I agree 100% with you with that, Carol. And one other thing, would it be possible with that meeting that we come up with, I think in years past, we used to come up with 2 or 3 different scenarios of how the assessments would be calculated. Chapter 70 per students, because the towns themselves each year have to vote on the direction we're going to go, or we go Chapter 70. Am I not correct? So I would think it would be prudent at that time too, if everybody else feels the same way, to have those figures on the funding source. That's my comment and request.
Typically, Mr. Plath asks for that every year anyway. So we're happy to try to provide, you know, the 2.5% or the per pupil, whatever, as well as what we know currently about Chapter 70.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. Any further comment from the board? Sure.
One of the other things that I'm not sure that we can do it, but I just want to put this out tonight for people to be mulling it over. Regional school districts are allowed to have stabilization funds. And one of the things that comes to mind with what's happened this year, and if you look over the history of the district and you look at special education expenses, you can see some years when it's really spiked and then other years not so much. So even though we need, you know, we sort of need the money now, one of the things that might be more palatable to the 2 towns might be to put some money aside in a stabilization account for special education expenses. Then, for example, next year, if we say something happened and a student moved, so we wouldn't need all that money, but it would sit in that stabilization account. And in future years, if we do a little better, getting a little more E&D each year, you know, at the end of the year, some E&D could go into that stabilization account as well. It might help us in the future. You know, we were trying to do that really with Circuit Breaker, but we were only as good as what was coming into that. And so it might be a way of us doing a little bit of future planning with the help of the 2 towns, and it might be something that would be more palatable because that money's there for a specific purpose and not to be touched for other things. Just a thought that I wanted to throw out.
Mr. Chair, could I add a little bit to that? I know the town of Yarmouth's stabilization direction has been one of increased stability. 3 or 4 years ago was really, really low, and that affects the bond ratings for borrowing. And so Yarmouth, with the selectmen's goals and the town administrator's planning, have sought successfully to improve the stabilization picture for Yarmouth. I would, myself personally, would endorse the idea that you just suggested because it adds a stable factor rather than looking on this roller coaster up and down based on things we can't predict when we do the actual budget. And obviously it affects positively the financial picture if it's done right.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. Any other comments? I guess if I were to make a comment, I don't want to see us going backwards, as many folks have said. I think we've been able to add programs, slow outflow, improve relationships with our 2 towns. I think it's fantastic, the direction that we've gone in, and I'd like to see it keep going that way. And I think that if we keep the lines of communication open and have some tough discussions, sure. And that's what it's going to be. It's going to be tough discussions. We've talked a lot about a lot of different things. I think it's nice having a board with varied opinions and views. I think it helps us. So we will move on from the budget discussion on to our student representative, Mr. Patrick Hanberry at the youth table.
Hello. All right, so recently semester 1 closed and all of our end of term stress is now over, thankfully. All right, guidance counselors will be coming into all of the junior English classes this week to expose the juniors to the college application process. And then coming up will be the annual junior parent meetings in which they will also start learning about the college process with their parents. And then good news as well for the district. 8th graders seem to be very excited about their iPads. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hanberry. Any questions? You would like to ask Mr. Hanberry a question? Mr. Edwards, please.
When the guidance counselors come in with the application process, do they also have, and this may be a question for Carol too, and after the student loan gets paid, and I imagine the parents co-sign the loans and blah, 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 do they discuss protection in the fact that if something would happen to the student, what's the legal, because once you sign your name on a dotted line, if the student doesn't pay the loan, then the person who co-signs usually is the parent. And not that you want to say that something could happen, but say something happened to that student, the parents would still have to end up paying for that. Do they also discuss that with an insurance, like a term insurance policy or something like that? The only reason why I asked you that is when I set one up for my daughter, and then after a period of time, once the student loans are paid off, then that belongs to her. So do they do something like that? In other words, as advising that you know of?
I'm not exactly sure what they're going to discuss. I believe it's just about the applications and trying to find a college, not necessarily about the process of the loans. I can tell you Thursday when I have mine.
Okay. The only reason why is when we went through the process, nobody really sat down and said, how as a parent who co-signs the loan, you know, the idea is to protect, and the whole point of insurance is to protect, not to use, but to protect. Nobody really explained that to me, and I kind of figured it out on my own. So that's something that, you know, I would think would make a little bit of sense to have somebody come in, and Massachusetts Savings Bank life insurance is one of the cheapest insurance policies out there for term, and a student who's 23, 24 is going to pay less than $120 a year for the whole year for a term of for about $100,000 or thereabouts. That was with for my daughter. Depends upon the weight, the height, and all that other good stuff. But I was just wondering if that was part of the process when they're doing that, because they never told us about it, and I only figured it out myself afterwards. Thank you.
Mr. Jenks, do you have anything you'd like to help answer that?
Sure. Ken Jenks, Principal, DY High School. Those kinds of topics don't really get covered with those meetings in guidance with the student. The focus is very much with the student and the parent on the pathway to college. Multiple financial aid evenings are offered through the guidance department at the high school. It ranges from nights in conjunction with 4Cs sometimes, how to navigate through the FAFSA forms. We have admissions officers and financial aid officers from a variety of colleges. They come, and those are the evenings when those kinds of topics are covered. In a sense, with the student, there's really valuable time with that student-parent meeting during the day to focus on some of the colleges, you know, course choices to get you to your dream college, but that is part of the program, but it tends to be after hours with the parents.
I'm not saying no, and I'm not saying I don't disagree, and I don't sell insurance, so let's just throw that out there, so I'm not looking to make a commission or anything. I'm just saying that nobody really sat down and explained it to me, financial officers or anything else like that. And the only reason why I thought about it this past year was trying to put everything in order to make sure I had everything. And that was one of the things that I had at night when I was trying to fall asleep, saying, okay, the process was thinking, and that was one of the things that I thought of. And nobody sat down and said, well, these are what they're gonna, this is what you're gonna do. And some of the schools, they're not gonna tell you that. And I think if the parents are aware ahead of time that when they go to sign their name for the financial aid, especially with the federal and even some of the private loans, they have to pay them. They're not dismissible in bankruptcy, so you're gonna have to pay them. And if, God forbid, that something happens to that kid, and with cost of education of $150,000 to $200,000 or whatever the cost is, and they go out and borrow the money, and we have a low-income district, okay, that's where they're going to get some of their money, with the exception of if they're really smart and they get some of the grants, but they're still going to have a cost. Well, you may be teetering on putting some of those parents, if something would happen to those kids, in a bind that they're going to have to pay, and they got to pay that for 25 years, and that's almost like a second mortgage payment. You know, and I don't know how many kids you know that are coming home and they can't even go out and live on their own because their student loans are $500 or $600 a month. I mean, that's almost, and they've got to pay that for 25 years.
You're totally bumming me out, Steve.
Maybe it was Steve that pushed the snow button. Thank you, Mr. Edwards. Any further questions for Mr. Hanbury? Thank you, Mr. Hanbury. Next up is our Dennis and Yarmouth Selectmen Liaisons. Andrea St. Germain is not with us tonight for the Yarmouth side, and Mr. Carey for Dennis, please.
I just wanted to thank the Dennis Finance Committee and the Selectmen and the Yarmouth Finance Committee and Selectmen for being here this evening. It's certainly important that we work together, and I'll try to make some of your meetings when the school budget discussion comes up. So if you know it's going to be a topic, if you could make sure I know about it, I'll do my best to be there. Other than that, I just wanted to give the high school a little bit of plug in saying that I've been following the girls' ice hockey team. Girls' ice hockey, who bring students into the district that live out of our district, by the way. A couple that I know of. And they're doing quite well. Don't be afraid to go watch them sometime. So, I mean, we do great in a lot of our sports, but I've been hearing a lot of good things about the girls' ice hockey. So. Wednesday night, 7 o'clock. Wednesday night, Tony Kent Arena, 7 o'clock. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Carey. Any questions from the board for Mr. Carey, please? Thank you. We next up have our Director of Finance and Operations, Mr. Azer, please.
I need a mic that works, thanks. Just in case you hadn't heard enough already from me tonight, I got more stuff for you. So just want to give you a quick update on the Baker Gymnasium. I have a memo in your packet, and we're going to ask you to vote on something, but I'll explain it first. And I know in the packet for the last meeting, the superintendent put a very detailed memo together on things that are going on, but we'll summarize briefly. So what has happened so far is that we have put columns of shoring from the floor to the ceiling of both the gymnasium as well as the level underneath where there are some classrooms. That was completed several weeks ago. We're now in the process of abating the hazardous materials that are inside the building, so that involves cleaning any equipment that was in that area, as well as then now getting in there, taking down what's remaining of the gym ceiling, taking out all the materials in there, the insulation, the asbestos, so we can really get in at and see the full exposure of what was actually damaged. The abatement work should be done by within the next couple of weeks, at which point then we need to have the architect and the engineer come back in and take a look at and try to do some forensic engineering and see if they can try to determine what caused the failure of the trusses and the ceiling areas, and then also come up with a plan to permanently repair it. So that's where we stand right now. That process, we don't really have a specific time frame on how long it's going to take to do that work. Once, regardless of how long it takes, then once the plan is determined as to the repairs, then we have to bid out the work, get it done. It's going to be a lengthy process. And Superintendent's going to talk in a minute about funding or one possible scenario to fund this work until we can get reimbursed from the town. But one possible avenue to explore is to submit a statement of interest to the MSBA, the Mass School Building Authority. They have a program called Accelerated Repair. Similar to the green repair we just went through, it's for roofs, windows, boilers, and those systems. And they try to pick projects that are ready to go, that can be completed in a short amount of time. The deadline to apply for that is February 14th. I've had discussions with them. I'm not entirely sure that the timeline that we're looking at for our project is going to match up with their timeline, because their timeline is further delayed than ours. So if we were to fully wait for that process to go through before we did the work, it would put the start of school in September, to be perfectly honest with you, would potentially put that in jeopardy, and we don't want to have that happen. So they still encouraged us to apply for the process, and if it's able to work out, terrific. If not, then it doesn't. But I think we owe it to the folks in the town of Dennis, who are ultimately responsible for the building, to explore every possible avenue of funding before going to the town for it. So we have so similar to what we've done in the past for statements of interest, it's the same language. It's in boldface at the bottom of your memo. That I can just summarize it, but it basically says that the committee approves the statement of interest that we've developed, and so on and so forth. And if one of the members would like to put forward the motion and vote it up, then we'll get that process going and at least have another potential funding source for the project. But there's by no means any guarantee that we would get it. But I think like I said, we owe it to the district and the town to at least pursue it. So I would recommend that the committee approve the motion that's printed in the packet.
Do you want it read verbatim, or?
I would recommend that you do that, yes.
Okay, I would, if consistent with you, Mr. Chair, I would go ahead and use my best elocution methods. Resolved, having convened an open meeting on February 3rd, 2014, prior to the closing date, the school committee of Dennis-Yarmouth Regional School District, in accordance with its charter, bylaws, and ordinances, has voted to authorize the superintendent to submit to the Massachusetts School Building Authority the statement of interest form dated January 28, 2014, for the Ezra H. Baker Elementary School, located at 810 Route 28, West Dennis, Mass., which describes and explains the following deficiencies in the priority categories for which an application may be submitted to the Massachusetts School Building Authority in the future. Replacement or renovation of a building which is structurally unsound or otherwise in a condition seriously jeopardizing the health and safety of school children where no alternative exists, specifically the gymnasium section and associated areas, and hereby further specifically acknowledges that by submitting this statement of interest form, the Massachusetts School Building Authority in no way guarantees the acceptance or the approval of an application, the awarding of a grant, or any other funding commitment from the Massachusetts School Building Authority, or commits the city, town, region, school district to filling an application for funding with the Massachusetts School Building Authority. Period.
Second. Would you like to take a drink of water, Mr. Morris? We have a motion. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That carries unanimously.
Mr. Chairman, may I go down to my item since it's related, and then back to Larry on the school zones? I don't really have a lot to say about this yet, but one of the things that will have to happen, given our current financial situation, is that the district will likely have to go out for some temporary borrowing so that we can pay the bills as they come in for the Baker project. I'll be working with Larry and our banks that we work with to determine when is the appropriate time to do that. But you have the authority under the regional schools laws to do temporary borrowing. And so I did speak with the school district's attorney about that, and you can temporary borrow knowing that we would then ask for an appropriation at the town meeting, which both the Finance Committee and the Board of Selectmen have supported, and we're working very closely with them as we walk through this project. So I just wanted to make you aware of it. There's nothing to do or vote on tonight, but I wanted to make sure that you at least heard it this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Woodbury. So now that brings us to the school zones assignments, and believe it or not, Mr. Azer.
Okay, so now we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about school assignment zones in the Yarmouth K-3 schools. So when you put a topic like this on the agenda, it usually freaks parents out. Oh my God, you're going to move my kid. I like my school, and so on and so forth. The only reason this isn't in a bigger font is because it wouldn't fit on one slide if I did that. I want to be extremely clear with this statement that no student currently enrolled in a particular school will be required to change schools unless they choose to do so. It's kind of like Obamacare. If you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. Although we promised to actually follow through on that. If you like your school, you can stay in your school, regardless of what you see on the next several slides. Again, if you like the school you're in, you can stay in that school as long as you want to. Okay? I want to be very clear. These changes that we're proposing and presenting to you will only affect new students in the district. All right. So in order to understand how we got where we are today, we need to have a quick history lesson on how the Yarmouth elementary schools have come into being or evolved over the last number of years. So if we go back to up to and including 2005, 2006, Yarmouth had 4 elementary schools. You had Lawrence MacArthur was grades K to 2. Across the fields, you had John Simpkins for 3 to 5, and Station Ave and Emmy Small were both K to 5 schools. After the 2006 school year, John Simpkins closed. The third graders, or the kids who were going to end up being in third grade at Simpkins, the following year moved over to MacArthur. MacArthur became a K to 3 school. The K to 3 students from Emmy Small, they all moved over to Station Ave, and the 4th and 5th graders that were at Simpkins and Station Ave moved to Emmy Small. So now you have, starting in 2006, 2007, you had LCM was a K to 3 school, Simpkins was closed, Station Ave was a K to 3 school, Emmy Small was a 4 and 5 school. So what happened is those kids were all moved around, but the bus zones weren't really changed. They're just sort of the kids up were relocated and everything went along with it and went on. So we had the 2 K to 3s and we had a 4 and 5 school up until the end of last year when we closed Lawrence MacArthur. So now LCM closed, Simpkins is still closed, Station Ave is a K to 3, and Emmy Small became a K to 3 school because all the 4th and 5th graders moved to Wixon. So now we have 2 K to 3 elementary schools in Yarmouth, and that's what we have. However, as the map shows, you can see here's Station Ave, here's Emmy Small, here's Simpkins and MacArthur. What happened is that after both of these closures and reorganizations, the assignment zones weren't changed. So what you have is a map that looks like this, that this red line is the dividing line. This is the Station Ave school, and all of this is the Station Ave zone. This part is used to be the Simpkins and LCM zone, and now became the ME Small zone, because that's where all those kids eventually ended up. Now, a reasonable person might look at this and say, well, ME Small is in West Yarmouth, but the zone is part of Yarmouthport, but mostly South Yarmouth, along 28, and this is Long Pond, and that doesn't really make a lot of sense. And when we look at the numbers, about half of the kids who currently attend Station Ave live in this area, which would make sense, because that's where they live and they should go there. But from a practical point of view, it's backwards. So I've spent a lot of time with the bus company and the principals, looking over what makes sense. And we've come up with this. It sort of divides the town in east-west. This right here is Forest Avenue. This cuts across 6A. There's no houses here. Cuts down to basically Parker's River, right? Parker's River. Creates a nice delineation. This is the Station Ave school, it's in the zone. This is the ME Small school, it's in the zone. And so we came up with this line for two reasons. A, we think it makes sense geographically. It doesn't really split up neighborhoods. It doesn't cut through lines, streets and stuff like that. And also because Station Ave is a much bigger building than ME Small, we needed to come up with a plan that had proportionally as many students in each zone that each building could support. So that's what this comes up with, because we're able to run a report or an analysis of how many kids live in this zone and how many live in this zone. Now, again, everybody who goes to one of those two schools is grandfathered, so to speak, where they go. So it's going to take a little bit of time to get this to naturally work out, but the way families turn over and so on, we think that proportion will still maintain that balance. So that's what the map looks like. Now we want to just go through a couple of guidelines that should hopefully address concerns. So to repeat yet again, all students who choose to do so will remain in their current school, regardless of the new assignment zones, and they'll continue to receive transportation per school committee policy, which right now is every kid in grades K to 3 gets transportation if they want it. New students that have an older sibling already enrolled in a particular school can also enroll in that school, regardless of the new zones, and transportation will be provided. So if you live where are we? So if you live, oops, where we go? If you live out here on, off on 28 in West Yarmouth, and you go to Station Ave now, and you're in the new ME Small zone, you can still go to Station Ave as long as you want to. If there's a second grader who goes to Station Avenue now and they have an incoming kindergartner, and the family wants to keep them all together at Station Ave, which is certainly a reasonable thing to do, they can all go to Station Avenue. We're not going to split up families, again, unless they want to. That's their prerogative, but we're not going to tell anybody, no, you have to split up. Obviously, we want to keep families together. That seems to be a reasonable thing to do. Students currently enrolled in a school outside of their home zone may request a voluntary transfer to their home school, and transportation will be provided if desired. So again, going back to this, if you live over here in southwest Yarmouth, I guess, and you currently go to Station Avenue and you want to go to ME Small, that's great. That works for us. If you want to volunteer to do that, that's terrific. You'll be in the school that's in your zone. You'll get a bus, but it's completely voluntary. All other new students will be enrolled in the school located in their respective home zone, and transportation provided per district policy. So again, if you're a brand new student, you move in or you're just aging up to kindergarten, If you live in one of those two, depending upon which area you live in, that's the school you're going to be assigned to. We're still going to have our intra-district school choice program, which means regardless of where you live, you can request to go to a different school. The way we're going to work it is that the process will be open, and we're going to batch all the requests together and decide on them at the beginning of the summer. I think the advantage to doing that is when they come in one at a time and you do them on a case-by-case basis, sometimes we may have an imbalance that comes out. If we do them all together, we can make some better decisions. So say you have 10 kids that want to come in. If you have 10 kids, you may need to add a section for that. We just went through an hour and a half of the budget. We may have to think twice about approving those requests if it requires us to add another teacher. So therefore, we're still going to have the application process, but we're not going to make the decisions until the summertime. And the last thing is that this has always been our policy. If you are approved for intra-district choice, you must provide your own transportation. So if you live in the ME small zone and you get approved to go to Station Avenue, you have to provide your own transportation. That's always been the district policy for any of our schools for intra-district choice. So that, in a very quick nutshell, is the zones.
One of the things I'll just add to that is that last summer, we started to see that happening naturally, where people were saying, well, I live over here and I'm right near the school. Why am I going to that school way across town? And so we did honor those decisions, and as a result of it, it did start to kind of be more logical in terms of having kids near their home school for the K-3s in Yarmouth. So we think that it won't be a heavy lift for new families. And as Larry said numerous times, we intend to honor the commitments that we've made to our families already in the past.
You said you didn't want to break up families, and if they have an older sibling, what if their mother or father went to that school?
Ms. Eichner, please.
Thank you. I'm Carol Eichner. I'm the principal of ME Small School, and I just double-checked with Mr. Kroll because this week is kindergarten registration, and we recognize that this is kind of new information for some families. So we want all families in Yarmouth to know that if you come to whatever school, we're not going to send you away. We share the same paperwork, the same registration information and materials. Of course, you may go and visit the other school, but we're going to take care of families when they come to us in the next couple days. And so what may or may, like, they're going to be curious. That a map was very difficult to see on the television, but just know that we so welcome all of our families in Yarmouth to come to our schools, and we're ready for you, and we'll take great care of you when you get there. We'll make sure you're in the right direction, and we'll clarify all the places of zones and things like that.
Thank you, Ms. Eichner. Mr. Carey, please.
Maybe Carol doesn't want to go too far, just in case. First of all, I think the most important thing to do is control the message in this part, because parents will think one thing even though we said something totally different. Have PTOs and school councils been advised or informed that this is coming? I think it's important that we have those discussions so that we control the message, so that we tell exactly what's going to happen, what we will provide, what we won't provide. You know, that if you have an older sibling and a younger sibling coming, that same child can go to the same school. I just think this makes total sense. But once again, I think it's more important is how the message is delivered, that we make sure everybody knows.
We really wanted to make sure that we brought the message to the school committee table first. So other people have not been given the message, but they can now.
Respectfully, any family that has called To be very specific, we haven't led them astray. So we know that we have children currently in our early education programs, for instance, and we've been making sure we're directing them to where they probably need to go next week, recognizing respectfully that it really sits in your hands tonight.
Thank you again, Ms. Eichner. Any further questions from the board? I myself have one question. I understand that some of the students would be grandfathered in and things like this. Would this incur any additional buses that we know of?
No, it shouldn't incur any additional buses. Reason being is that the way our busing plan works is we actually have fewer elementary buses on the road than middle school buses. So we do have capacity there. But like the superintendent said, we already sort of naturally started this progression last year. So in some neighborhoods, you may see some buses passing each other, but I think it'll be very limited. But it definitely shouldn't require any additional expense as far as buses goes. And just to follow up on Mrs. Eichner's point, I appreciate her reminding us of that. So after tonight, we will be getting, we're going to upload onto our website a street listing for the town of Yarmouth, and you can look up what street you live on, and in almost every single case, the entire street goes to one school, except for some of the really main roads that are miles long. They might be split. And you can look up and say, okay, if I live on this street, I'm in this zone for new students, and we'll be getting those out. Like I said, they'll be in all the they'll be in the hands of all the schools tomorrow, not just Emmy Small and Station Ave, but we're going to send them to all the schools, because sometimes people go to they have an older kid and that's the school they go to, as well as the central office, because we take a lot of phone calls and parents who walk in trying to register, so we'll get that all out. And we'll get those street listings and every information up on the website, and we'll work with the principals to get that message out to their families in the best way that they seem. Thanks.
Mrs. Woodbury has something she'd like to add, please.
I would have had some good news items. There are many good news things to talk about in addition to the girls hockey team, but I'll save it for another night. But I do want to comment on a couple of the information items. I tried to give you a great deal of information on the out-of-district placements, and I hope you had time to read the memo. I'm happy to answer any questions now or in a phone call or whatever. But I also wanted to point out the newsletter from the Housing Assistance Corporation, where some of our students from Nathaniel Wixon appeared on the front page because they attended the Shelter Cape Cod telethon. And in the two-page article, I thought this little paragraph was just very telling, and also it was nice to see, because this goes all over the Cape. So this gives an opportunity for folks to see our students in action. Perhaps the highlight of the show was the 12 4th and 5th grade students from the Nathaniel H. Wixon Innovative School in South Dennis, who read essays on the topic of what homelessness means to me. At least 2 of the students had personal experiences with their own family being homeless. So I just think it's important that people know that the things that we talk about here are very real.
Thank you, Mrs. Woodbury. I think that brings us now to our consent agenda. Our consent agenda consists of the minutes from the January 23rd school committee meeting, as well as a donation, which I will read. We would like to thank Mr. Frank Marasola, representing the Howard Lodge Masonic Angel Fund of South Yarmouth, who has donated 4 dozen warm hats and 6 dozen gloves to the students at the Station Avenue Elementary School. So we have our consent agenda.
Consent agenda is printed in the agenda.
We have a motion and a second on the consent agenda. Any further discussion? Seeing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Ms. Woodbury touched on some of our informational items that are listed in here. We also have a personnel list, some upcoming events. As we had said, tonight has been our public hearing. Next February 13th, next Thursday, will be our final budget adoption. Upcoming this week also, February 4th, kindergarten registration. February 5th, kindergarten registration as well. There is also a jazz band performance at 7 p.m. at the high school. Kindergarten registration continues also on February 6th. As we alluded to, we were going to have a budget meeting next February 10th, next Monday. And again, as I mentioned, next Thursday, February 13th, is our next school committee meeting. And Mrs. Woodbury would like to add something.
Just a point of clarification for the committee. Our finance subcommittee was scheduled for 6 o'clock on Monday. Is that something that you would like me to change to 6:30? If we're going to have a joint meeting, I would try to schedule it probably for the high school library. I don't think it's necessary that 6 o'clock or 6:30. I just want to know 6:30. Does that work best for everyone? Okay. Okay. 6:30 at the high school library, I hope. All right. Thank you. We don't need, we'll cancel.
A few more informational items we have coming up. February 4th, 5th, and 6th is our the beginning of our DY Advantage Community Week, where the 4th, 5th, and 6th we will be featuring Station Avenue Elementary School, Ezra Baker Innovation School, and the Emmy Small School from 10 to 11:30 or 1 to 2:30. And the following week, we will have our higher grades, Nathaniel H. Wixon Innovation School, grade 4 to 5, from 9 to 11 a.m. or 12:30 to 1:30 p.m. Matakees Middle School for grade 6 to 7, 9 to 11 a.m. or 1 to 2 p.m. And finishing up at our high school, grade 8 to 12, 8 to 10 a.m. or 1 to 2 p.m. Any further comments from the board?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor? Aye. Thank you all for coming. Drive safe.